The chamber was enormous. It was built to make visitors feel small. The ceiling stretched so high that the upper levels disappeared into shadow. The walls were lined with the flags and seals of 40 species. The seats of the 5 council elder races curved in a wide arc above the central floor, raised high so that whoever stood below had to look up. Always up. That was the point. Aaron Webb stood on the central floor alone. He was not a tall man. He was not a young man either. He had gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from years of hard work and harder decisions. He wore a plain dark suit with a small human flag pinned to his lapel. No armor. No weapons. No entourage. Just a man standing on a cold marble floor, looking up at the 5 most powerful governing bodies in the known galaxy. The hall was full. Every seat in the observer gallery was taken. Diplomats, journalists, analysts, and officials from dozens of species watched in silence. Many had traveled from far systems just to be here. This moment had been anticipated for weeks. High Speaker Voron of the Das-Sari Collective leaned forward in his seat. He was tall and pale, with 4 arms and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. He had led the council for 11 years. He had never lost a vote. He had never been challenged in any meaningful way. He looked down at Aaron the way a man looks at something small on the ground. He began to speak. His voice came through the translation systems in a smooth and measured tone, but the words were not smooth. They were hard and deliberate, chosen to land like stones. Humanity had grown, Voron said, beyond what was safe for the galaxy. Human expansion had pushed into frontier systems without council approval. Human warships had been seen near the borders of 3 protected zones. Human technology was advancing at a rate that the council found concerning. And humanity, despite repeated invitations, had refused to accept a council oversight agreement. This, Voron said, would end today. The terms were read aloud by a council secretary, displayed on screens throughout the chamber so every observer could see them clearly. Humanity would decommission 60% of its active warship fleet within 90 days. The ships would be dismantled under council supervision. Humanity would surrender administrative control of 3 frontier colonies: Kepler Station, the Duran Belt settlements, and New Ashford, to council-appointed management. And humanity would sign a full oversight agreement giving the council the right to review, delay, or veto any human expansion, research, or military decision going forward. The terms would be accepted within 30 days. If they were not accepted, the council would move to full economic sanctions, restrict human ships from all major transit corridors, and formally designate humanity as an uncooperative species, a status that would effectively cut them off from galactic trade, communication networks, and diplomatic protections. Voron sat back when the reading was finished. Around him, the other 4 council representatives looked equally satisfied. This had been planned carefully. The terms were designed to be almost impossible to accept with dignity, but also impossible to refuse without consequence. It was a trap built from paperwork and politics. Clean. Legal. Devastating. The observer gallery was very quiet. Some of the aliens watching shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few leaned toward each other and whispered. Several representatives from smaller species looked at the floor. Everyone understood what this was. The council was not offering terms. They were delivering a sentence. Aaron had stood still through all of it. He had not shifted his weight. He had not looked at the screens. He had not reacted when the colonies were named or when the word decommission was used in the same sentence as 60% of their fleet. He had simply stood and listened with his hands at his sides and his eyes on Voron. When the room was fully silent, Voron gestured toward him. It was Aaron's turn to respond. Aaron took one slow breath. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a single folded piece of paper. He unfolded it, looked at it for a moment, then folded it again and put it back in his pocket. He had not needed to read it. He already knew what it said. He looked up at Voron. Then he looked slowly across the full arc of the council seats. Then he looked out at the observer gallery. All of it. Every face looking back at him. Then he spoke. His voice was calm. Not shaking. Not angry. Not desperate. Just calm and clear, carrying across the chamber without effort. He said, "We will respond in 30 days. That was all. 7 words. Spoken without drama. Without threat. Without any visible emotion whatsoever. He folded his hands in front of him, gave a single respectful nod toward the council, turned, and walked toward the exit at a normal pace. Not fast. Not slow. Just walking, the sound of his shoes steady on the marble floor. The chamber stayed silent until he was gone. Then it erupted. The observer gallery broke into noise all at once. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages. On the council arc, 2 of the 5 representatives were already leaning toward each other and talking. Voron watched the door Aaron had walked through, and for just a moment, something moved across his mirrored eyes. Not satisfaction. Something else. Something he quickly put away. Across the galaxy, the exchange was broadcast and rebroadcast within hours. News channels ran the clip of Aaron standing alone on the floor. They ran it again with commentary. They ran it a 3rd time in slow detail. Analysts tried to read his face. They found nothing useful. Opinion writers called it a delay tactic. Politicians from 3 species publicly advised humanity to simply accept the terms before things became worse. On the Dasari homeworld, Voron gave a short press statement. He said humanity had been given a clear and final choice. He said the council expected compliance. He said the 30 days were not an opportunity for negotiation. He said the terms were the terms. He did not say what he actually felt, which was a faint and irritating uncertainty he could not quite name. On a dozen worlds, species who had once dealt with the council in difficult circumstances watched the clip of Aaron walking out of that chamber and said nothing out loud. But some of them made quiet notes. Some of them sent quiet messages. Some of them began, very gently, to watch what humanity would do next. The 30 days began. Humanity said nothing more. No statements. No press appearances. No fleet movements that anyone could track. No political outreach that anyone could see. They simply went quiet. And for reasons they could not yet fully explain, that quiet made more than a few old and experienced observers across the galaxy feel a deep and formless unease. They had seen anger before. They had seen fear. They had seen nations stall and nations beg. They had never quite seen this. The first week passed and humanity said nothing. No press statements. No diplomatic messages. No requests for meetings or extensions. The human embassies across the galaxy opened each morning and closed each evening, and the staff inside them smiled politely and said nothing of substance to anyone. Human representatives at smaller galactic committees attended their regular sessions, voted on routine matters, and went home without commenting on the council ultimatum even once. It was as if the 30 days did not exist. The council took this as a good sign. High Speaker Voron gave a quiet dinner for the other 4 council representatives at the end of the first week. It was held in a private room in the upper floors of the council building, with a long view over the capital city lights below. The food was excellent. The mood was relaxed. One of the representatives, a broad and slow-speaking elder from the Murak Federation named Councillor Hess, raised a glass and said that humanity had clearly realized the situation and was simply preparing itself to accept the inevitable with whatever dignity it could manage. The others agreed. Voron smiled and said nothing. He drank his drink and looked out the window and told himself that the faint unease he still felt was nothing more than old habit. He had been in politics too long. He saw problems where there were none. By the second week, the mockery began. It started on the smaller news channels and opinion networks, the ones that thrived on noise and strong language. A commentator on the Scifi public network called humanity a species that had always been louder than it was strong. A political writer on the Murak Federation feeds wrote a long piece about how human history was full of dramatic gestures followed by quiet retreats, and that this situation was simply the latest example. A popular entertainment channel on the Youth Combine ran a comedy sketch in which a human diplomat stood in front of a mirror practicing how to sign a surrender document with a smile. The sketch got a large audience. Other species joined in. Not all of them, and not the most serious voices, but enough to make the mockery widespread. Humanity was called soft. Humanity was called a paper power, big enough to look dangerous from a distance but not truly willing to pay the cost of resistance. Some said the human silence proved it. If they had any real answer, they would have given it by now. On several frontier worlds near human space, local officials began quietly making arrangements. If the Council took administrative control of the 3 named colonies, there would be logistical questions, transitional needs, new supply lines to consider. It was practical thinking. It was also a signal, even if those officials told themselves it was not, that they believed the outcome was already settled. The human embassies stayed quiet. But not everyone was laughing. On a mid-tier world called Severance Point, there was an old alien named Counselor Maddo. He was not famous. He was not powerful. He had spent 40 years in minor diplomatic roles for a species called the Inhari, a quiet people who lived on 3 small worlds near the edge of the outer belt. The Inhari had no warships. They had no great resources. They had dealt with the Council twice in the past and both times had come away with less than they started with. Maddo had watched Aaron walk out of the Council chamber on a small screen in his office. He had watched it 3 times. Then he had sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. His assistant, a young Inhari named Sila, had asked him what he thought. Maddo had said, very quietly, that he thought everyone was making a serious mistake. Sila had asked what kind of mistake. Maddo had said that there was a difference between silence that came from having nothing to say and silence that came from already knowing exactly what you were going to do. He said that in his experience, the second kind of silence was the one that should frighten people. He said that humanity had not looked frightened in that chamber. Not even slightly. Sila had asked if he was worried. Maddo had looked at her and said he was not worried for humanity. There were others like Maddo. Not many, and they were not the voices getting airtime on the major networks. They were older diplomats, retired military observers, a few historians who studied human expansion patterns. They did not speak loudly. They sent careful messages to colleagues they trusted. They reread old records about how humanity had behaved in past crises. What they found, consistently, was that humans did not go quiet when they were beaten. Humans went quiet when they were working. None of this reached Voron. Or if it did not reach him in any form he took seriously. By the 3rd week, in the deep freight corridors that ran along the outer edges of human space, something was moving. It was not obvious. It was not meant to be. The ships involved were not warships. They carried no weapon signatures that would trigger monitoring systems. They were listed in transit logs as supply carriers, maintenance vessels, long-haul freight movers. Their routes were filed correctly. Their crews were small and said little at any port they stopped at. But they were moving in patterns that did not quite match the routes they had filed. Small deviations. Short stops at waypoints that had no official entry in any registry. Brief communication bursts on frequencies that were technically legal but rarely used. A young analyst at a monitoring station near the outer belt named Felix noticed one of these patterns on a routine scan. He flagged it in his report, noted it as a possible filing irregularity, and sent it up to his supervisor. His supervisor looked at it, agreed it was mildly unusual, and forwarded it to the regional logistics office for review. The regional logistics office was busy with 3 other matters that week. The report sat in a queue. The ships kept moving. No one connected the movements to the council ultimatum. No one connected them to each other. Each one, looked at alone, was simply a slow freighter on a long route, nothing worth a second look. It was only if you pulled every movement together onto a single map and looked at the whole picture at once that something would begin to take shape. Nobody did that. The second week became the third. The third began moving toward the fourth. The mockery on the news channels continued. The council dinner parties continued. The quiet fear of old men like Matto continued, unheard and unshared. And in the dark between stars, in corridors that nobody was watching, humanity moved with the calm and the patience of a people who had already decided exactly what they were going to do and needed nothing from anyone's attention to do it. The galaxy laughed. The ships moved. The clock ran down. Donna Marsh had not slept more than 4 hours in 11 days. She did not complain about this. She did not mention it to anyone on her team. She simply kept a large cup of black coffee on her desk at all times, refilled it when it was empty, and kept working. Her office on the Human Coordination Hub above Kepler Station had a wide window that looked out into space, but she had stopped looking at it after the first 2 days. There was no time for looking at windows. Her team was spread across 9 rooms on the same floor. Engineers, logistics coordinators, diplomatic liaisons, medical supply officers, communications specialists. 41 people in total. They worked in shifts, but Donna did not take shifts. She moved between rooms, checked progress, solved problems, asked questions, and moved again. She had a datapad in her hand at almost every moment and the screen was always full. The work was not simple. It was not loud either. That was the part that required the most discipline. Everything they were doing had to be done without announcements, without press involvement, without any kind of public record that could be picked up by council monitoring networks. This was not illegal. Humanity had broken no laws and intended to break none. But it had to be quiet. The moment it became visible, the council would move to block it, reframe it, or use it as evidence of hostile intent. So it stayed quiet. Donna's team had been given a list of 14 species. Each one had a history with the council that was not good. Some had been denied membership in trade agreements for reasons that were never clearly explained. Some had had territorial claims dismissed without proper review. Some had asked for infrastructure support during crisis periods and received nothing. All of them had been, in one way or another, pushed to the edges of galactic political life and left there. Humanity had been watching this happen for 20 years. They had kept records. Careful, detailed, organized records. The kind of records that nobody builds unless they expect to need them one day. That day had arrived. The first shipments went to the Inhari, the quiet 3-world species near the outer belt. The Inhari had been dealing with a crop failure on their second world for 8 months. They had applied to the Council's humanitarian logistics program twice and been told both times that their application was under review. Nothing had come. Their people were managing but barely, and the stress on their food networks was beginning to show. 3 human freight carriers arrived at the Inhari receiving station without prior announcement. They carried grain stores, soil treatment compounds, water filtration equipment, and a team of 12 agricultural engineers who had volunteered for the posting. The lead engineer, a quiet man named George, met with the Inhari station director and handed over a simple document. It listed everything in the shipment. It asked for nothing in return. It had no conditions attached. The Inhari station director read the document twice. Then she looked at George and asked what humanity wanted for this. George said nothing. He said they had noticed the situation and thought they could help. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said thank you in her own language, which translated into something closer to I will not forget this, and George nodded and went to help his team unload. The second shipments went to a species called the Veth, who lived on a single ocean world and had been trying for 6 years to get Council approval for an orbital construction platform. The platform would allow them to build their own small transport ships and reduce their dependence on expensive Council-affiliated freight services. The application had been delayed, reviewed, delayed again, sent back for additional documentation, and delayed a third time. Donna's team sent them the platform. Not approval for a platform. Not a promise of a platform. The actual platform, in parts, carried on 4 ships, with a crew of human construction engineers who had the experience to help assemble it. It arrived at the Veth homeworld 17 days before the Council ultimatum deadline. The Veth leadership called an emergency session when the ships arrived. They were not sure what to make of it. They were not sure it was real. One of their senior ministers spent 2 full hours going through the documentation with a Veth legal team, looking for hidden clauses, hidden costs, hidden obligations. There were none. The platform was a gift. No strings. No contract. No future claim. The senior minister sat back after the legal review and said nothing for a while. Then she said that she had been in government for 30 years and she had never once received something from a major power with no cost attached to it. Her aide asked what she thought it meant. She said she thought it meant they had all very badly misunderstood humanity. This pattern repeated across 12 more species over the course of 16 days. Medical supplies reached a species called the Doroth, who had been suffering a respiratory illness on their northern continent with no outside support. Communication relay equipment reached a small species called the Sun, who had been cut off from reliable galactic network access for 3 years after a Council infrastructure reorganization had quietly deprioritized their region. Clean energy systems reached 2 farming worlds that had been running on aging and dangerous fuel systems because no major supplier would offer them reasonable terms. All of it moved quietly. All of it arrived without ceremony. Donna's teams made no speeches. They held no press events. They did their work, made sure the receiving species had what they needed, answered questions honestly, and left. Back on the coordination hub, Donna tracked every delivery on a large wall display in the main room. Each time a shipment was confirmed received, she put a small green marker on the map. By the 18th day there were 11 green markers. By the 22nd day there were 14. She stood in front of the map for a moment on the 22nd day and drank her coffee and looked at it. Her assistant, a young man named Perry, stood beside her and asked if she thought it would work. Donna looked at the 14 green markers spread across the map. 14 species. 14 different histories. 14 different reasons to feel that the current system had failed them. She said that she did not know if it would work politically. She said that was Aaron's part of this, not hers. Her part had been to make sure that 14 species had a genuine reason to believe that humanity was something different from what the Council had always told them major powers were like. Perry asked what the Council had told them major powers were like. Donna finished her coffee, set the cup down, and went back to her desk. She said, something that only takes. The 14th green marker glowed quietly on the map. Outside the station window, in the dark, the clock was still running. 23 days down. 7 left. Day 30 arrived like any other day. The sun rose over the Council capital city the same way it always did. The transit lines ran on schedule. The food stalls near the main plaza opened at their usual time. Street cleaners moved along the wide boulevards in the early morning quiet. Nothing looked different from the outside. But inside the Council chamber building, the staff had been arriving since before dawn. Security had been doubled. The observer gallery, which normally held 400 seats, had been expanded with temporary seating along the side walls to accommodate the overflow of diplomats, journalists, and officials who had requested entry. By the time the main doors opened to the public, there was already a line stretching down 3 flights of stairs and out onto the street below. Everyone wanted to see this. The Council representatives took their elevated seats early. High Speaker Voron arrived last, as was his custom, and settled into his chair with the calm of a man who believed he already knew how the next 2 hours would go. He had been briefed that morning by his senior staff. No unusual activity had been detected in human space. No fleet movements. No emergency diplomatic communications. The human embassy had sent one message the previous evening. It said only that Ambassador Aaron Webb would be present at the scheduled session. Voron had read that message and felt the last of his unease finally leave him. Humanity was coming to accept the terms. They had spent 30 days finding a way to do it that preserved some small piece of their dignity, and now they were coming to do it. It was, Voron thought, the only logical conclusion. The terms were airtight. The coalition behind them was solid. There was no play left for humanity to make. He arranged his notes on the desk in front of him and waited. At exactly the scheduled time, the main floor entrance opened. Aaron Webb walked in. He was dressed the same way he had been 30 days ago. Plain dark suit. Small human flag on the lapel. No armor, no weapons, no visible display of anything. He walked to the center of the floor at the same calm pace as before and stood in the same spot. But he was not alone. Behind him, walking in 2 quiet columns, came the representatives of 14 species. They filed in without hurry and arranged themselves in a wide arc behind Aaron, facing the council. They were different in every visible way. Different sizes, different shapes, different colors, different ways of moving. Some were tall. Some were small. Some had features that translated poorly to humanoid expression. But they stood together in the same space with the same stillness, and the effect of it, the simple visual fact of 14 species standing behind one human man on the council floor, hit the room like a cold wind. The observer gallery went completely silent. Voron's hands, resting on his desk, did not move. But something changed in his mirrored eyes. Something arrived there that had not been there before. Aaron looked up at the council arc. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then he spoke. He said that humanity had considered the council's terms carefully over the past 30 days. He said that humanity understood the council's concerns about galactic stability and the importance of cooperative governance. He said that humanity shared those concerns completely. He then said that humanity would not be accepting the terms as presented. A sound moved through the observer gallery. Not loud. More like a breath released all at once. Voron leaned forward and began to speak, but Aaron continued without pause, his voice still level and unhurried, and something in his tone made the room let him continue. He said that instead, humanity was tabling a proposal. He nodded to a young human aide standing near the side wall, who carried a physical document to the council secretary's station and placed it there. At the same moment, the document appeared on every screen in the chamber. It was called the Galactic Common Charter. Aaron did not read it aloud in full. He summarized it clearly and without drama. The charter proposed the dissolution of the current 5-seat Elder Council structure. In its place, it established a multi-species assembly in which every recognized galactic species held 1 seat and 1 vote. No species would hold permanent authority over another. No species could be sanctioned, restricted, or penalized without a full assembly vote and a clear evidence process open to independent review. Expansion, research, and military matters would be governed by agreed common standards, applied equally to all. The charter had already been signed. Aaron held up his copy. Behind him, each of the 14 representatives held up their own. 15 signatures. 15 species. Enough, under existing galactic procedural law, to formally table a governance reform proposal and trigger a mandatory assembly vote. Voron's voice came then, sharp and hard, cutting through the chamber. He said this was irregular. He said it was outside procedure. He said humanity was in violation of the terms of a binding ultimatum and that the council would be moving immediately to sanctions. Aaron looked up at him. He said, very calmly, that the council was welcome to review the procedural documentation. He said that every step taken over the past 30 days had been legal, properly filed, and compliant with existing galactic law. He said that the vote trigger was valid under Article 19 of the Galactic Governance Framework, which the Council itself had written and ratified 14 years ago. He said the Council could call for a legal review if it wished. He said that was their right. He then said that the Assembly vote, once triggered, could not be legally blocked by the Council under that same article. The chamber stayed very quiet. One of the other Council representatives, a small and usually composed elder from the Yeth Combine, leaned toward Voron and said something in a low voice. Voron did not respond. The vote was called. It was conducted through the chamber's formal voting system, open and recorded. Every species with assembly standing was registered in the system. The 14 species behind Aaron voted first, their representatives confirming through the system in sequence. Then, one by one, other species in the observer gallery registered their votes through their diplomatic credentials. It took 40 minutes. When the final count appeared on the chamber screens, the number in favor of adopting the Galactic Common Charter was not close. It was not even a contest. The reform passed with the largest recorded majority in galactic governance history. The 5 council seats had voted against. They were 5 votes among many. Voron sat very still in his chair. Around him, the other 4 representatives were equally motionless. Below them, on the floor, Aaron stood with 14 species at his back, and none of them were celebrating. None of them were shouting or raising arms or making any display at all. They simply stood there, calm and steady, and let the numbers on the screen speak for themselves. The observer gallery was absolutely silent. Then, slowly, it was not. The 5 elder seats stayed empty for a long time after the chamber cleared. Voron was the last to leave. He sat in his chair above the empty floor and looked down at the space where Aaron had stood. The screen still showed the final vote count. Nobody had turned them off. The numbers sat there in plain light, large and clear and patient, the way facts tend to sit when they have nothing left to prove. His senior aide came to the chamber door twice to tell him his transport was waiting. Voron did not move either time. He just sat and looked at the floor below and said nothing. He had been in politics for over 30 years. He had managed coalitions, broken them, rebuilt them. He had outmaneuvered older and smarter opponents than himself. He had always, in the end, found the angle. The pressure point. The place where things could be pushed in the direction he needed them to go. He could not find where he had gone wrong. That was the part that kept him in his chair. He had not been defeated by force. He had not been threatened or blackmailed or outspent. He had been outthought, quietly and completely, over a period of 20 years, and the final move had been made in 30 days so cleanly that by the time he saw it coming there was nothing left to block. Eventually he stood, straightened his coat, and walked out of the chamber without speaking to anyone. The other 4 council representatives did not do much better in the hours that followed. Public statements were issued by their offices, careful and measured, using language about respecting galactic democratic process and committing to constructive participation in the new assembly framework. The statements said nothing real. They were the kind of words that powerful people produce when they have nothing left to say but cannot yet bring themselves to say nothing. Across the galaxy, the reaction was enormous. News networks ran continuous coverage. The vote count was displayed and redisplayed on screens on 100 worlds. Analysts tried to explain what had happened and mostly succeeded only in explaining that they had not seen it coming and could not fully account for how it had been done. Opinion writers who had spent the past 3 weeks calling humanity soft and broken went very quiet, and the ones who did write something tended to keep it short. The comedy sketch on the Yeth Entertainment Channel, the one with the human diplomat practicing how to sign a surrender document, was quietly removed from the network archive. Nobody mentioned this publicly. Everyone noticed. The new assembly held its first formal session 4 days after the vote. It was a different room from the old council chamber. Smaller, though it did not feel smaller because every seat in it mattered equally. The seats were arranged in a full circle rather than a raised arc. No position in the room looked down on any other. The ceiling was lower and the light was warmer, and the whole design of it said, simply and clearly, that this was a place where different things would happen than had happened before. The first act of the new assembly was the passage of the Common Species Protection Accord. It guaranteed every recognized species in the galaxy the right to fair representation in any governance decision that affected them. It guaranteed access to humanitarian support during crisis periods, reviewed by independent committees rather than closed-door council sessions. It guaranteed that no species could be economically isolated or politically penalized without open process and transparent evidence. It passed without a single vote against it. The 5 former council representatives, now seated in ordinary positions in the circle like everyone else, voted in favor. There was a practical logic to this. There was also, perhaps, something else in it. Some small acknowledgement, made without words, of what the old system had been and what it had cost. Old Councillor Maddo of the Inhari watched the session from a seat in the observer section. He had been given observer credentials through the Inhari diplomatic office and had traveled to the capital specifically to be present. He watched the vote total come in and sat very still for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, took out a small notebook, and wrote one line in it. He did not show it to anyone. He closed the notebook and put it back in his pocket and watched the rest of the session with quiet and complete attention. His assistant Sela, sitting beside him, asked what he had written. He said he had written that he had been right. She asked if that felt good. He thought about it and said that it did not feel as good as he had expected. He said that being right about something like this mostly just felt like relief. After the session ended and the assembly hall began to empty, Aaron stood near the side entrance speaking with 2 of the new assembly coordinators about scheduling for the following week. He looked the same as he always did. Calm, a little tired, not especially remarkable to look at from across a room. A young alien approached him carefully. She was Veth, one of the ocean world species, small and pale blue, with large dark eyes that were currently very wide. She was a junior diplomatic aide, barely 2 years into her posting, and she had clearly spent some time working up the nerve to cross the room. She stopped a respectful distance from Aaron and asked if she could ask him something. Aaron told her of course she could. She said that she had been trying to understand something since the vote. She said that everyone around her, all the senior diplomats and analysts and officials, were still trying to work out how humanity had done it. How they had built a 14-species coalition in 30 days without anyone seeing it. How they had prepared legal documentation precise enough to trigger Article 19 without a single procedural flaw. How they had moved supplies and equipment to 14 worlds without council monitoring picking up any pattern. She said it seemed impossible. She said she wanted to understand it because she was going to spend her career in diplomacy and she wanted to know what she was supposed to learn from it. Aaron listened to all of this. Then he was quiet for a moment. He said that the 30 days were real but they were not the whole answer. He said that humanity had spent 20 years watching the galaxy. Watching which species were being pushed to the edges. Watching which laws had gaps in them that a careful reading could open up. Watching which problems, if solved quietly and without cost, would mean something real to the people experiencing them. He said that humanity had not built the coalition in 30 days. They had built it over 2 decades of paying attention to people that the powerful had decided were not worth paying attention to. He said the council had handed them the moment. But the preparation had been going on for a very long time before that. The young Veth aide looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked, very quietly, why humanity had done all of that. All that watching and preparing and quiet helping, for 20 years, with no guarantee it would ever matter. Aaron thought about Donna and her 41 people working without sleep. He thought about George handing over a document with no conditions to a station director who had expected a cost. He thought about 14 green markers on a map. He said, because it was the right thing to do. The young aide stood very still. Around them the hall was nearly empty now, the last few voices fading toward the exits, the new assembly's first day settling into history. She had expected strategy. She had expected politics. She had expected the answer that powerful people always gave, the one dressed up in principles but built on calculation. She had not expected that. Nobody had. That was, in the end, the thing that left the galaxy speechless. Not the vote. Not the coalition. Not the legal precision or the quiet logistics or the 30 days of perfect silence. It was the reason behind all of it. Simple, plain, and completely real. Because it was the right thing to do.